You're listening to the StatsBomb Football Podcast.
One half a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us.
Welcome back to the StatsBomb Football Podcast. I am your host, Seth Partnow, Director of North American Sports. I am joined today as usual. I won't say always because who can predict, but by head of football analysis, the coach, Matt Edwards.
I like it. How's it going?
Good. And also by CEO and founder, Ted Knutson. Ted, how you doing?
Do it.
So we were at the Combine and Sloan Sports Analytics Conference last week, and that seems like a great place to start, just in terms of
No,
things.
I'm going to completely derail you.
Oh no, okay.
It wasn't even the most interesting thing that happened last week.
What was
the most interesting thing that happened last week was our discussion around Elizabeth Banks talking about the Kelsey brothers and Matt's reaction to the squirt. By far, this was the best thing that happened in the Combine. Matt's initial reaction to the Elizabeth Banks sort of reaction to the squirt Kelsey discussion was my favorite thing of the week.
Oh, wow. I mean, that must have been a slow week for you then, Ted. But
it was the busiest week of my life.
Okay, so
come on, Matt took this at face value, right? So,
yeah.
So for those of you unaware of the conversation, the Kelsey Brothers podcast was cut into a free-flowing adult conversation of implied, slightly innuendo nature around squirt and squirt bottles. But Matt, having been a player, has opinions about squirt.
Yeah, I agreed very much with what Jason was saying. You cannot have somebody else squirt you with the water bottle. Like, it gets all over.
See, there was no clarification really on the the water part. It was just a constant conversation about squirt.
There was a constant conversation. I think Travis knew where it was going. Jason may or may not have, based on his visual cues. But I also had very strong opinions on water bottle usage on the sidelines of games and at practice. Don't let anybody else squirt you. But it is a little more hygienic. I get it.
And Seth, your preference is also a former college athlete who may or may not have been squirted on.
I mean, I never played a sport with that at the college level with the helmet on, so it was very much a self-induced thing. I think we can call Matt's take on this the Baja Blast of the week. We're not sponsored, but Matt does love his Baja Blast.
For those of you who like callbacks, we have an unsponsored call every single week that we enjoy. Baja Blast is Matt's favorite degenerate substance of use, I guess. Anyway, moving right along.
The Combine. So, interesting things we heard at the Combine in Sloan. Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was not able to go to Sloan, so I was just at the Combine, so I'll kind of focus there. But really had a great time. We were able to meet with a bunch of NFL teams, had some really positive meetings while we were there. And some of my biggest takeaways are just the value of what we provide in our data. We also went to the Big Data Bowl finals, and the presentations there were just amazing. Every year the quality of those presentations and projects increases. And so it's awesome to see the work that they're doing. A lot of the work has been done around like offensive line blocking, or this year was tackling. And so much of utilizing tracking data itself is so much time is spent on like, how are we going to say that something was a block or something was a tackle attempt? Like, this person got really close to that person and their orientations kind of matched up, so we're going to say this was a tackle attempt. But when you're using a unified data product that has tracking data as well as eventing data built into it, you don't have to do that. You can just say, these are where all the tackle attempts happened, and move on to your analysis there. And it was interesting to see, last year we were at the Combine as well, and we were talking to NFL teams and sharing that and how that could be such a benefit. And it seems like this was the year where they finally picked up on, the eventing data is actually super important, and we can do so much better and deeper analysis using this eventing data in addition to the tracking data that's also top notch.
How about
For
you,
me,
Ted?
it's a weird one.
Yeah.
So my brain gets split across multiple sports, as those longtime StatsBomb podcast listeners know. So a little bit of the fun from the Sloan side was abusing Ian Graham and Michael Edwards, who were around the conference. Also longtime friends of the company. Sarah Rudd was there. Loy Shaw from the City Football Group, who I think formerly was a Harvard professor as well. So that was like fun. And actually, after my NFL panel, like it was just a line of people from the soccer space that wanted to come talk, which was also a little bit surreal. My brain was having some switching problems. From the combine itself, a part of it was just an acknowledgement of how much good work had gone into everything that we'd done. So we got some big wows on the platform. And if you've seen any of our sort of video demos, we'll probably trot some more of these out on social. Like it really is a slick platform. People that have a lot of tech knowledge are like, wow, that works quickly. Like it's a gorgeous platform. It's very interrogatable. So that was part of the fun. As Matt said, having people realize that the event data has a ton of value, even if it's a year later than we were expecting, like that was really good as well. For those of you who don't know the timeline, we designed the event data and some low frequency tracking data initially for StatsBomb and the American football product. And then last year, we put on sort of full fat tracking and the physical data, but it's integrated inside of the data set, which is actually pretty crucial because it means that you don't have to worry about the matching of other people's data. You don't have to worry about the proxies that a lot of people have to do with tracking around blocking or tackle engagements or anything like that. We collect all of that alongside of it. I know this sounds salesy, but like often I'll talk about data design as part of the whole company, and actually, what data you're working with as a nerd or a football person is a big deal, and what kind of things you can find out from people's stats and their skill sets. So that was fun. And also a couple of people came up and said they already really liked this pod, which was surprising to me, including somebody whose book we've read frequently, Ben Alamar, sort of longtime stats person in and around a couple different sports, and he's got a new version of his book coming out soon. So that was kind of the fun bits, along with just kind of hearing what the pain points are for teams these days. Tracking data, especially in the college space, seems to be a big deal, and thankfully we actually do have the solution to that.
For me, I think the most interesting thing that happened was, as often happens at these things, it's not the official bits, but sort of the things that happen in coffee shops and bars. And I was actually at a sort of an NBA social event, sitting with some friends of mine, including, and this is not intended as a name drop, but whatever, the general manager of the Sacramento Kings is a guy named Monty McNair, who, before he got in on the team side space, had started as a writer. He also played football at Princeton. He was a receiver at Princeton, and so a lot of the work he did that actually got him hired into the Houston Rockets front office originally, which is where he started out, was analysis he did there. And it was funny because I don't remember how it came up, but we were talking about, sacks are a quarterback stat. And another friend of ours at the table, who's also a basketball person, talked about how he frequently uses one of Monty's blog posts from 2007 as an illustration of credit assignment and getting to whose fault this is. And even back then, sort of as an aside, in a post examining when sort of various metrics converge, how many pass attempts do you need to know before you have a good sense of a player's yards per attempt or completion percentage or sack rate? It was just sort of as almost an aside that sack rate for QBs converges much faster than other stats, which is actually a pretty good indicator that the quarterback has a lot to do with this.
Well, this is actually one of the indicators that comes out of the draft elements, right? It's one of the things that I think Eric Eager and maybe Kevin Cole flagged up a couple of years ago. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. How often, one, are you being pressured on dropbacks? And two, are those pressures turning into sacks? And if you have a very high, sort of pressure sack rate out of college, it seems to have, some legs behind it too. It's very difficult to sort of have the faster actions built into you over time. Like some quarterbacks can do it, and it's kind of on the cusp, but other ones, especially ones that seem to, want to use their legs a lot, have great mobility, may struggle with the transition to the NFL, where you are much more likely to be caught by the giant fast men.
It's also, we talked last week about line play, and am I getting blamed or credited for quarterback having happy feet or being willing to stand into the pocket in the face of the rush? And sort of parsing those things out is always a challenge. And that's also a challenge at the combine in general, where the drills and tests and such are designed in a way to mimic on-field football abilities in certain ways, but they aren't directly that thing. Obviously, the 40-yard dash is one of those things, and one of the highlights to come out of the combine this year was we had a new 40-yard dash record. How much does that matter, Matt? What is the 40-yard dash? There's obviously some signal. I mean, running fast is good, but
yeah, I mean, it was funny to see the articles like Xavier Worthy runs faster than Usain Bolt, and it's like, well, maybe. I mean, Usain Bolt is not a notorious good get off in his 100. He just happens to be really high turnover and takes over once he hits top speed. But the thing that sticks out for me, is it's always a big deal when somebody sets a record in the 40. And then you look at the people who are those top 40-yard dash times, and it's not necessarily people who have had great NFL careers. John Ross has had it most recently. He did take over for Chris Johnson, who did have a really productive career. And I think he was the one of maybe the top 5 40-yard dashes that has had a productive career. One of the things that helps being really fast in the 40 is not having a lot of mass to move. And one of the things that hurts in football is not having a lot of mass. And so that is one of the problems. You look at Xavier Worthy, who set the record this year. I think he weighed in at 166 at the combine.
Is that a viable weight for a football player? Because it doesn't feel like it.
Really, no. I mean, if you are 166, that is really thin, and the higher you go, the more violent the collisions are, and it's going to be trouble. I was looking at how they're deployed, though. So if you have somebody that's 166 pounds, you are probably not going to be running them on slants and overs and shallows and anything over the middle. And that showed in his route tree. He was almost 40% of his routes were goes and posts. And so if you have somebody like that, you better utilize him in a way that he does not put himself in danger of getting injured. The second or third best time from the combine was A.D. Mitchell, who also played at Texas. They're just fast guys all over the field at Texas, I guess. And he still had a high volume of goes and posts, and I think that goes for everybody. But he was utilized in a lot different area, had catch rate over expected on, I think, almost all of his routes. In breakers, out breakers, short, deep. And so somebody like A.D. Mitchell, weighed in at, I think, 195, is a little bit bigger, a little bit sturdier, and had different production at the college level. And so I think when you're looking at those combine measurements, it's always a great data point to use, but it's how well do they do at various things? Are they able to translate that into football speed? And so that's one of the things that we do with our physical metrics is we have our speeds, our accelerations, top speed, top acceleration, but then also trying to make them fit into football specific movements. So, top speed on deep routes for receivers, or get off speed by receivers. How quickly are they getting downfield in the first second of a play? We talked a little bit about get off speed recently for D linemen. I think that was maybe in podcast 2. But the more that you're able to make these indicators and measures fit into football specific things, the more predictive and the more beneficial it'll be as you're trying to move guys from college to the NFL.
Yeah. So top speed is a physics problem, right? But it's also a biomechanics problem. Like, how do you most maximize your muscular production into moving your body as fast as you can? I'm such an old that I remember the discussions around taking track athletes and turning them into wide receivers around Willie Gault. So that kind of like dates me to the mid 80s there. And it was tried a couple times back then. And then actually, so funnily enough, you mentioned Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt had an end of career sprinting thing where he became a soccer player in Australia. And he was not good enough at the soccer parts of being a soccer player that to overcome the the pace differential with everybody else that he would have had. And he also has a size differential too. Like Usain Bolt's quite interesting. I think it's, when I think of like the great wide receivers, it's one of those things where either you end up with smooth, fast, and strong. So you end up with Jerry Rice, who also, like, on his breaks almost rarely seemed to change speed. He could change anytime that he wanted to without having any real deceleration. And he was always faster than people picked up on because he was smooth. He was such a smooth mover. Or you get Terrell Owens, who was, just an athletic freak, right? And he was fast, but he also was so strong that he would break tackles and do that. These days, when I think of sort of pace wide receivers that are also freakishly strong, like DK Metcalf is one of the first ones that comes to mind, the deep ball there. There's tons in the league. But I think, yes, there is a very direct point there that says that some guys might be fast, but that skill set of their body isn't necessarily going to translate to a long career in the NFL. And the injury risk is a real thing.
You look at DK Metcalf, he kind of did the opposite Usain Bolt, right? He recently entered a track meet and did pretty well, for somebody that is not training. This is like a slight throwing my wife under the bus. I don't know if she actually listens to the podcast, but she'll be interested.
This is great because I was going to mention that Matt actually is married to a former track athlete that knows a lot about this stuff.
Yes, but she is very particular about speed for athletes and how that would or would not transfer to track speed for football players. Because I look at someone and I'm like, oh, wow, he's super fast. And then Mary Beth in the same breath will be like, well, his running form's terrible and this and this and this. And I'm like, he's still running away from everybody. He is still very fast. She's like, well, he could be so much faster if he's focused on this.
You two need to get together with Nike and design some change of directional track meet elements, right? I think that's really important. We're not looking for sort of straight line speed or curved speed anymore. You two as a couple should go to the people out there in Oregon and be like, look, we think that this is the next level of Olympic competition.
The Olympic suicides.
Oh,
the Olympic down and back.
This is another aside. She thinks that Usain Bolt is the greatest Olympian of all time, right? And I said, well, Michael Phelps has 30 gold medals or whatever. She's, well, if they had skipping and backwards running, Usain Bolt would have 30 medals as well. So she is all about this. She would be all in on the sidewinder Olympic running, Olympic shuttle times. I like it.
Oh, so many different places to go from there. But really where I kind of want to go is the reason that we have these sort of proxies at the combine is until very recently, you were not able to directly measure these things in bulk on the field. Obviously, sort of the stuff, Ted, you're talking about with Jerry Rice, that's like very visible. And it sort of helps to have hindsight to recognize, oh, that's why he's the greatest receiver ever. Whereas maybe sort of prospectively, it's like, that's interesting. But I wanted to ask you, since you've done this in now multiple sports, about when you have a new information, new collection, new data, how we go about sort of matching what we're capturing, what we're measuring to the actual game skill, game event, game goodness or badness that we're really trying to get at when we're talking about scouting these players.
So we're a little bit weird in that many times we'll try and go back to first principles about what we think matters in any particular set of elements. So I have a gambling background, and in the soccer space, so funnily enough, I did not play soccer at all because we didn't have it where I was as a kid. Like when I was going to school, my parents had moved out into the country in Indiana. And at that time, there was no soccer penetration in Indiana. I couldn't join a team. So I started playing with the international students at the University of Oklahoma in the summer on dusty pitches. And I never actually learned proper ball skills, but I learned enough about the game to really start to care and understand like what things are like in technique. I actually am a trained coach in certain aspects as well. That's been kind of a learning journey for myself. And so as part of that, we would start to look at all right, what do we think might matter that isn't in the data set? And then you talk to some smart people, you maybe talk to some coaches and say, okay, what is the technique element of this that you really care about? And the thing in soccer was we added a couple of different things. Height of pass seemed like it might matter. The height of the ball was a later thing that we added for shots. And we explicitly added that inside of the data spec, but we did not know if it mattered. We thought we were guessing at it. And we did the same thing with the American football product. And so the reason why the line engagements look like they do, or what we call line battles, is because we wanted to be able to tell how long any particular set of players were engaged with each other, where they were they engaged with multiple players, because we knew that mattered, right? Like I'd talked to and actually been embedded with, coaches and started to pick their brains about that type of stuff. But there's also this element of sometimes you're making wild ass guesses and you don't really know. Like I think pose data is probably the biggest wild ass guess that's out there in the data sets. Does it matter? Nobody really knows. Is it something you might be able to sell on TV or possibly to Roblox or some sort of shit like that? Yeah, maybe. Like, maybe they're excited about better mocap from the whole game. But that's the area where we'll have guesses that we think are sort of appropriate. And then you have other guesses where you're like, yeah, I don't know if this is going to work out or not. But as long as it's not too expensive, maybe we'll throw that in.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like the baseball with their pitching, the things that they can do to analyze pitchers and their movement. Football has a long way to go of just kind of solving the lower level and the building blocks first, and then eventually moving up there. But that's something that I've had the idea of not, quarterbacks, I think, is the easy transition point there for people. It's like, well, they throw like a pitcher. Let's kind of use it there. But for me,
they
it's
definitely do not throw like a pitcher.
That's true.
Our friends over at Driveline Bases will also tell you they are not like a pitcher in how they throw. Long throw guys, also not like a pitcher, quite a different thing, and also not like an NFL quarterback. But all of these things are very useful. The stuff that goes into baseball is unreal. Like, yes, that one actually really is intriguing because you can measure all the physics and all the force. And because there are so many pitches, like the pitching is the whole game, effectively, pitching and batting. Like there, it makes a lot of sense. In football, it's 22 people. And you get, throws on 60% of the downs. And so there's a lot of diversity on that. And only one guy can throw. But yeah, no, I think you're right. The baseball stuff kind of blows my mind. And most of the sports are very far from that. But it's also like an indicator that one, there is some transition because some of the quarterbacks go to Driveline and work on that. But also two, we have so much more to understand, and using technology alongside coaching is going to be crucial for the next developments of the game.
And you add in the additional sort of the translation factor, something we certainly heard a ton of times at the combine. It's always you hear at the combine is, okay, great college player, but, and I imagine there's similar league translations in soccer as well. Something that is successful at this level, at the Power 5 level, the Group of 5 level, maybe even lower down, might be a different set of things that are needed to be successful at the NFL, both because of the higher level of competition, but also sort of the different styles of things that are doing. We talked about this with respect to sort of, linebackers needing to cover instead of just stuff the run and chase people down, like we talked about last week. But there are those things all over the field. And again, figuring out which of those things are, okay, he may have been a great college player, but which of the things he does are going to be good indicators or not of success at the next level.
So what we have in soccer, though, is that you actually get to send guys down to the lower level and multiple lower levels while you still have their contract, and then test them out. And so you're like, look, we're going to throw him into this pond, and then we're going to see how well he swims. and then you bring him back, and then you throw him into the next pond that has bigger fish in it, and then you see how that goes. And so you're actually able to manage your risk a little bit better in those spaces. On the league to league translation, especially the top leagues, it's always complicated. And we found in the gambling space as well as the soccer space that sometimes leagues will change their quality of player inside them dramatically just over the course of a couple of years, like a 2-year stint, where a bunch of players that are the best get sucked out of that ecosystem and somewhere else, and now they have to replace them and revitalize the playing set. So that's also another challenge for any of your modeling, because you're like, oh, well, I didn't realize it could possibly be this volatile. But in some cases, like Spain, La Liga 2 used to be one of the best leagues in the world for young players that were good. And then over a couple of years, a lot of the best Spanish players got brought to either Paris and France, or to England especially. And they had to hoover those guys up in the second league into the first league. And the second league was then this dearth of players for a couple of years until they got replenished. So it's you get it's a little different thing. And soccer has an easier time of it than having to waste a first round or a second round draft pick and then hoping that it works, especially from something like North Dakota, where, occasionally they don't work out so well, eh?
Matt, I want to ask you about this. There's sort of it's initially a baseball concept, as many are, but I've seen it. I think it's applicable to a lot of different sports, and I want to hear your thoughts about it in football. And that's the notion of a quadruple A player. For those that don't know, like the top level of minor league baseball is triple A, and there are some players who are too good for that level. They put up like gaudy stats there, but for whatever reason, they aren't quite good enough to be at the very top level. And we certainly see this in basketball, where if anyone who is sort of even a fringe NBA player will just put up, stupid stats in the NBA G League. And the same is true. I think, great championship player, but can he do it in the Prem is always an open question. Or the Dutch league to the Prem is a translation that as a Manchester United fan makes me sad. But Matt, is there a similar thing, and is there a challenge for that because there isn't really the same sort of interim step that's been necessarily established, where not quite good enough yet but might get better to get to that NFL level?
Yeah, I think it is difficult to translate that to the football space because there's not necessarily the like either minor league or developmental thing like the G League. The recent increase in spring football leagues has happened a little bit, that has given guys a chance who are maybe fringe roster practice squad NFL players have gotten a chance to then go perform in the XFL or USFL and now the UFL, which I think starts in a couple of weeks. But I think that is giving people an opportunity to kind of prove their worth at a professional football league while it's not the NFL. But really, I think the biggest difficulty for people like that is just the speed of the game. You see quarterbacks who have performed really well in those other leagues, Jordan Ta'amu, Case Cookus, I think is another good example, who will
Matt, you're just saying names now. Case Cookus can't be real.
No, he really is. And there are a few Case Cookus stands out in the world.
Is this a major or general booty question?
This is not a general booty question.
Okay. But we talked about Squirt earlier, so I just wanted to keep us on track for the theme of the beginning. You were saying about fringe players in the pace of the game. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that will be a good opening one week as we just go through the all like college football name list. So write that down. Seth is for next week maybe. But you look at these players who are really good in those leagues and then, either get a chance to go be a practice squad guy. Like I think Jordan Ta'amu, who's bounced around in the NFL, signed with the Chiefs for a little bit. And just the speed of the game is so much different that they may have some incredible tools, but it doesn't fully transfer. And so I love to see when people get a chance to prove themselves at a, lower level. So UFL, I'm all about that. And one, it's just more football for me to watch and analyze, but gives people an opportunity to, maybe they went out a little bit too early. They developed a little bit later. That doesn't happen in football quite as much because you have to wait 3 years out of high school before you can go to the NFL. You can't jump in and be like overwhelmed physically in the same way. But still, it gives people an opportunity to play at a high level, prove, develop, learn, grow, and then eventually hopefully make it to, the NFL, which is a dream for them.
Are those leagues better or worse than the SEC? He made the ooh face. He's thinking about it. Sorry, I thought that was a really interesting question because, yeah.
I would say they would beat the professional teams would beat the majority of SEC teams.
Just because they're bigger and older?
My biggest issue is the level of, so the coaching level is really good. The organization, SEC teams are playing year round, and these UFL guys don't have that same, all year round development. But it's a good question. Again, maybe for a different pod.
Okay.
So one thing you said there that I think leads me to the last topic I wanted to touch on today is you talked about guys being toolsy. And I had an interesting conversation with Eric Eager and some of the folks from Sumer right after Ted's panel, actually at Sloan, talking about the draft, any sort of player acquisition. Ted and I both with a gambling background, we think in terms of bets, and you're making bets on which players will work out and which won't, and at when, how, what position, what mechanism to add, early draft, late draft. Minimum free agent you're actually spending money on. Does it make sense to make bets on tools versus production or kind of current ability? I think this is a fascinating topic, and I think it is very different across positions, and I think completely different in the football context than in many other sports, probably because of any number of factors from the size of rosters to the lack or presence of guaranteed contracts. But I'm interested in your thoughts on this first, Ted.
I think the most interesting question is actually dictated by the salary cap as much as anything. So the way that rookie salaries work is that they're much smaller. And actually, this was a change. Like they changed it after, who was it? Sam Bradford, the Oklahoma guy that just like completely busted on one of the biggest contracts of all time. They used to be able to pay, first round quarterbacks a ton of money to secure them. And then the league was like, well, particularly the NFLPA seemed to have want to restructure that a bit. And so they did in the CBA. But what it does is it creates this thing where you either want to have basically a top 5, top 8 quarterback, or you want to re-roll to get a chance at a top 5, top 8 quarterback because of the disparity in the quarterback contracts. Like a top tier quarterback like Mahomes he takes a massive amount of cap. And actually, this is the first time that a team has won the Super Bowl in the salary cap era with like someone taking up as much of a percentage of the cap as Mahomes did, which speaks a lot to how KC has done roster management over time. Super important role, sort of boring because it's legal and accounting at the same time, but under discussed. And so when you look at it that way, these teams are actually kind of locked into repeated strategies in that particular position. In other positions, it's totally different. And I think we talk a lot about better data gives you more chances to hit later round spikes, right? It doesn't always give you as much in the earlier rounds because there's more scouting done and you have more time to do that. But as you get later in the draft, you hit the tiers where many teams have not had enough resources to simply be able to evaluate all of those types of players. So if you're looking for low risk elements, late round draft picks, that then you can potentially turn into higher quality players, like that's one area that does it. The other thing that kind of strikes me is the uncertainty principle around all of this. Like people will be more confident about their evaluation and their projection of a player than is reasonable. And that's natural for humans, and we see it over and over again. It's actually a human trait. But if you're aware of it and you can readjust for it, what you can say is like, hey, we're not certain about this type of stuff. And in fact, some of the guys that we might think are worse than that might actually be better. And so you will allow other people to take those choices ahead of you, and then potentially pick up more picks or just not spend as much as they would, thereby keeping more resources back for other things that either have value that come up on you, or that you maybe have a higher degree of certainty on. There's one thing that I from a different sport that also like plays in with this. So I was talking to Daryl Morey one time when he was still at Houston, and I was like, Daryl, please explain the Melo pickup for me, because like this is just baffling to me. Like your squad doesn't seem to have a Melo shaped hole in it, and he seems like he's a bit washed. And he's like, well, those roster spots that we use in the NBA and those types of contracts, we will tend to do high EV elements. So like some guy that we're probably doesn't really matter, but if it's someone like a Melo who's willing to come in on a minimum or something lower in the contract spec, and he could still have some gas in the tank, it makes sense for us to take that gamble. And you're like, oh wow, okay, that actually does make more sense than I was expecting, and it's a very justifiable, logical way of approaching something that seems baffling and sort of a funky media choice. I think that works in football in a similar way. You just won't hear them be quite as honest as Daryl is about it.
And I think it depends on the position, like we talked about, right? Like if you play receiver, there are 7, 8 receivers on an NFL roster, and 3 or 4 are on the field at a time. And you have more of a chance to be, kind of like a one-trick pony if you're a receiver. Quarterbacks, there's obviously just one, and you kind of have to do everything. Running backs are similar. There's usually 1, maybe 2 on the field at a time. But you see these roles that are kind of created for specialists, right? Where you get like an edge rusher who's just a pass rusher, right? He's not going to be able to really play the run or be at every down player, but he's somebody that is really good at one trait. He has a really good pass rush. And so at what point is that guy going to join your team? And I think, Ted, like you're talking about with the Mello example, if it's a veteran guy who you can bring in on like the veteran minimum to be a third down pass rush, get some pressures and kind of be a role player there, that makes a lot of sense. But if you're going to spend a first round pick on somebody that's going to be a minimal player that, plays only on third downs or is a receiver that can only run deep routes, your return, your value there is much more minimal based on the contract. And so I think there are a lot of things that go into that is, fit on the roster, right? You can't have too many people who are, hey, we have a whole bunch of pass rushers that we want to play and we feel good about them, but we don't have enough guys that can play against the run or play every down. Contract with the salary cap, and then scheme
still
as
matters.
well.
Yeah, like
very much.
We need versatile guys versus like we have these roles and we know what they do. And I think on both sides of the ball, like versatility is ramping up. The other thing that you get a little bit is you get the brain versus the body thing, where you get the sort of savvy veteran element of it. But depending on what position you play, like your brain firing very quickly and can read everything, but your body doesn't cooperate in the same way that you need it to. Like you might age out of being one of those, even moderately good players because of that.
That puts in mind perhaps my favorite sports quote ever. It's a basketball player named Corey Brewer who threw up a wild shot at the basket once, and he came to the bench, and his coach was like, "Corey, what's going on?" He's like, "Coach, I did my thing. I got to the basket, and I just ran out of talent." What we're talking about there is recognizing the what needs to be done, and then it's just like, I can't anymore. So there's two questions about this sort of the specialist versus generalist. And maybe from a draft perspective, and what on a specialist, like how good at that one thing does someone have to be to justify a given spot? And the other question is, would you prefer someone who has sort of one way to be good and it's almost easier to evaluate versus someone who has more pathways to be good? Do we overvalue those sort of more lottery tickets, even if they're on an individual player level, or should we be focused on if this guy hits, here's how he will hit? So I don't have a good answer to those.
The last thing I think that needs to be investigated is how much of a student of the game are they? Because that actually leads to more ways for them to hit, right? If you have somebody that is in the film room all the time, is willing to put in the work, is willing to find ways to improve whatever skill set that they have, their physical skill set, those players are more likely to have the optionality pay off in ways that you don't expect versus the other ones who are just, kind of freaks of nature and they're living off their talent and they might be happy to do their one thing. But if they're not going to enhance that over the course of a 5, 10, 15-year career, like they probably won't have that 15-year career. They might have that 5. And that's a pretty big difference there.
Yeah. As a former coach, like I always loved players that, could do a lot of everything. Because you can just put them in a whole bunch of spots. And I would say I fell into this trap, just like you hear NFL coaches fall into this trap of, hey, I know this player is really good at something and I can fix all the other issues just because I'm such a great coach. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And you're like, wow, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. But I think that it is a really tough question of saying, at what point is this otherworldly talent able to cover up the other things that are maybe missing at the time? what's the situation that somebody goes into. Like I think Patrick Mahomes is a great example. Coming out of college was obviously very productive in an air raid system, but had a lot of question marks, and could not have been put into a better situation coach-wise, scheme-wise, situation-wise. He got to sit for a year, learn from Alex Smith, who was a great NFL quarterback, super knowledgeable, and then went to one of the most creative play callers in NFL history. And so that was a gamble that obviously worked out really well for the Chiefs. And then they look like geniuses. Like, why didn't everybody take a chance on Patrick Mahomes? And so there is a lot of variance that happens just in stuff not surrounding the player in any circumstance, just scheme, situation they go to, coaching, turnover with roster, turnover with coaching staff. Like, there's a lot that goes into projection that is apart from just the individual player, their skills, and their projection from college to the NFL. And that's one of the things that I think makes the draft and projection so difficult, is just figuring out what you can pull, what are the signals and what's noise, and being able to then transfer that into, a player by player analysis every year.
How do we account for this player failed because the organization he went to, had turmoil, was just dumb, the coach was wrong? Just hearing you talk about that makes me almost weep for some of the difficulties we talked about earlier in trying to parse out the important things from the input data. But even the result data is not at all, it's not totally linear from, on top of sort of the 10% or whatever shit happens where, guys get hurt or whatever. And, there's no such thing as a can't miss prospect for that. But even on top of that, just sort of the contextual factors that may distort what the signal would have been from their college production.
The biggest impact in athletic talent is actually good coaching, right? It's like, willing to work and good coaching. And one of the things that I was thinking about, so I did a lot of research into academies concepts before in the soccer space. And one of the things I wanted to do regularly was, academy kids get locked in pretty early, and then, you hopefully give them the best coaching they can. And then you eventually produce a product at the end of it that, might be great or might not be, whatever. But like, I wanted to recycle some proportion of that academy set in order to the kids that had not had good coaching, right? Let me take the kids that probably have talent, but have not had people that can sort of mature that talent in the best way, and see if we can find more spikes along the way. I think in college, that's a big deal. I think even in the pro space, like you have coaches that are able to create much better players than other ones. All coaching is not the same. And, there's probably so many careers that are stunted at the high school level because their coach at the time tells them the wrong thing, and they never get to the point where they can find better coaches. So I think that that's also an additional challenge. And accounting for the ability and the quality of the coaching staff is possibly the hardest single thing that you can do in the sports space.
All right. Well, that seems like a decent spot to end for the week. Next week, we'll be back. First of all, we'll have a new Baja Blast of the week from Matt, but we're going to move on and talk about some more pre-draft stuff, more how to better structure your bets to get better outcomes. Anything either of you guys want to leave the folks with?
I was just hoping that we could resurrect an old brand and get the podcast sponsored by Squirt next time.
Squirt. Sundrop. I mean, there are a lot of these citrus flavored drinks that I'd be
the Haitian treat.
Yeah.
Do you have a stance on Big Red?
Like the old gum, Big Red gum?
No. So in Indiana, there was a soda called Big Red, and it actually, I think, tasted a bit like Iron Brew does, which is a weird combination of the Scottish and the Midwestern there. But anyway, sorry, I was ending us on a goofy note because that's all that I've been doing this podcast.
We found on a family road trip 2 summers ago in remotest West Texas, where we stopped for gas, and my wife was very pleased that they had Big Red in the fountain.
Yes,
and that was that made that stretch of highway a little more bearable for the several hundred miles of nothing that we traversed.
On a future podcast, we can have friend of the podcast, Bill Conley, come on, and he can tell you about his passionate relationship with Cheer Wine.
Oh, I was just going to mention Cheerwine. Cookout, greatest restaurant, like fast food place ever. And they have Cheerwine on tap. It's great. Like next time I'm in the Carolina, Virginia area, there's going to be multiple cookout stops.
I am not familiar, but I will have to get familiar.
Wow. This is like, we have to go just for this. Or
Okay.
when the AFCA is in Charlotte, we will find a cookout. It's worth it.
Noted. On that note, I am hungry, and it is time for us to sign off for the week. So for Ted and Matt, this has been Seth Partnow and the StatsBomb Football Podcast. Thanks a lot for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.